Hey up folks, I'm Guy Kestevan, the Tester Man, and this is the brand new Norco Revolver. Specifically, the Norco Revolver C2 130. Absolutely drop dead gorgeous carbon fibre, down country, XC, dad country, whatever you want to call it, bike from the Canadian manufacturer, which to be honest, looks like everybody else's kind of flex day, lightweight carbon frame set with, you know, a bonus couple of bottle cages on the down tube. However, once we get close up on the detail, not only with the frame, but the suspension in particular, and the spec, Norco are doing some really interesting things here. So we're going to talk about the details and then a little bit about how the bike rides and whether that'll suit you in support of my infamous live ride review videos, which is where you'll see me on the trail actually riding the bike and get a proper feel for what this bike feels like on the trails. Well, to get the awkward bit over at the start, if you could subscribe if you haven't already, that'd be fantastic. And then there's notifications, thumbs up, likes, telling your mates. And if you really enjoy what I'm doing here on the channel, then please consider either giving me a gift via YouTube, which more and more of you are doing, which is awesome, or subscribing on Patreon. Now let's get on with what you came here for, my expert insight on this fabulous looking bike. Right, I've said it twice, so it must be true, but I think this is an absolute looker. And to be honest, pretty much everyone who's seen the bike when I've been riding it has commented on the aesthetics as well. I mean, without being a roundabout painter, British Racing Green always looks really fine to my eyes. But this particular tint on it is actually set into the lacquer. So it's lighter than a standard paint job and also gives it this really sort of top end look. I mean, the frame's actually made in Cambodia, which is a little unusual for premium bikes, but again, there's some superb detailing on it. So, you know, we've got proper captured cable guides there, so there's no cable rattle or noise in the frame, nothing going through the headset, which is obviously a win. In terms of maintenance, you've got really neat CNC machined linkage there, that yoke driving the shock, and then CNC little U linkage there. All the bolt and hardware on this bike are titanium, again, keeping that weight really low. You've got a little flap down the bottom there. They haven't circumcised the main pivot. There's a little bit of rubber there to keep the dirt out. You've got little bridges across the top of the chainstay guard there, just to add a little bit of damping. You've got more damping on the inside there, which is actually where a lot of the chain noise normally comes from. And you can see, because this is Shimano Di2, so that's a wireless rear derailleur, you've got blanking plates where there would normally be cables. And then, while we're tidying up on the frame details, not only have you got, I particularly like this, I mean, look at that for a super slim seat stay bridge. You often don't see a seat stay bridge on a flex stay bike, but it just helps tie that back end together. It is a fairly taut back end, is this, considering how damn light the bike is, because Norco are claiming around 1650 grams for the bare frame without shock, which is 450 grams lighter than the previous bike. It's lighter than the specialised Epic Evo frame, lighter than a Blur. It's even, I mean, with shock, it's kind of equivalent to my Cervelo Scott Spark. It's a proper lightweight frame, is this. But you've still got ISCG tabs. Don't know if you can just see them in there. So chain guide tabs in behind the chain set there. It's a threaded bottom bracket, none of that press fit nonsense. And then this flex stay design, which we're going to talk about more in a minute, because they've done something really, really interesting in terms of how the spring of the rear stays interacts with the shock. It gives you 120 mil at the rear. And then on this bike, the 130, guess what the fork length is? Yep, that's it, 130 mil, courtesy of this Fox 34 SL fork in performance spec. Which means you just get the more simple grip damper on it, but still an impressively light fork. You know, you can see all the sculpting there in that forged crown, taking the weight away from it. I mean, to be honest, I'm jumping ahead here, but to be honest, it would be really nice having Performance Elite on there, because that back end is so smooth and so controlled. It'd be really nice having the more sophisticated, more controlled damper to keep the bike aligned further and further into the descents. Because I don't know if you've already watched my Polaris ride around Garban and Nambield, which are some proper chunky Lake District descents, then you'll see this bike on the descents absolutely fluid flyer. I was actually setting PRs on long rocky descents that I'd gone down on proper big trail bikes with much chunkier tyres than that Recon on the back. And yeah, this bike was faster. So let's have a little bit chat about why that is the case, which is mostly suspension, but also geo, and then we'll have a word about the spec. So this is the medium of the 5 sizes available, slap bang in the middle, so 468mm reach, and then a 453mm seat tube. So that mast on top makes it relatively tall. You've got room for a 150mm dropper in there, but you're probably going to top out at about a 170. But you'll see that a lot in these lighter weight frames. They do tend to go for a longer seat tube on there just to get some structural strength if they've gone for that really low slope top tube to get the alignment on that shock. Because it's such an efficient layout having the shock there and then just the linkage there to manipulate how the suspension feels, that you make a compromise in the fact that you can't get quite as slammed with a super long seat post in there. But I don't think XC riders are going to want a super long seat post anyway, because they're heavier, they're more flexy, and speaking personally, I don't need that much drop on the bike. And then all sizes, you get 66-degree head tube angle on this 130 bike, and then 75-degree seat angle. So pretty much bang on for sort of modern fast trail down country, whatever you want to call it, XC, confident without being too slack, like it feels like you're chasing a wheelbarrow down the trail. And then in terms of the rest of the geo, proportional chainstay length, so from 422, I think it is, up to 434. So this is basically 4mm difference per size. So 426 on the back of this bike, which is very nice and tucked in. All the bikes in all sizes are both double 29er, as you'd expect for cross-country bikes. And then the only thing that's a real outlier, I would say, is the BB height at 342mm, which does seem high for a bike with only 120mm of rear travel, and that gives it a 32mm drop between the axles. However, it's not noticeable on the trail, as the Revolver sits a lot lower dynamically than most of the bikes using this kind of suspension system. So you're getting the same amount of stability from that lower centre of gravity and the same amount of crank strikes as you would with a lower BB. And that's all to do with how Norco have used the flex and the seat stay as a spring. So I'm going to drop the bike onto the floor and we'll have a good close-up look at how that flex stay and that shock and that linkage interact, and how that really makes a difference in how this bike rides compared to other brands.
So as you can see, Norco have actually engineered it so if I let go of that rear wheel and the bike settles in, that spring from that stay there, you can see there's a slight curve there, but it's actually, this is an engineered spring. This whole seat stay is actually trying to compress the shock. Without the bolt in, it's pushing the shock against the mount there. And if I turn it loose, you can see it actually comes forward quite significantly. So you've actually got compressive force from the seat stay going into the shock there. So the bike, rather than resisting compression, which is the norm with the FlexA system, is actually helping to compress the shock. So that's how you get that really super smooth plush feel at the start of the suspension stroke on this bike, which is very different to the kind of taut, some might call it efficient, rigid feel that you normally get from an XC bike with a flex stay system. And then you can see, you've got really nice free movement there on this little rocker link. It's very, very, very smooth. There's no drag in that system at all. And then down at the base there, I don't know if you can see that main pivot there, that's actually got enduro bearings in there, so top quality suspension bearing.
And then they've positioned it. I mean, although they say there's actually more anti-squat on this bike than is typical for Norco, it's still pretty neutral, I would say, in terms of both chain growth and the overall anti-squat equation, because that's still something far more complicated than just the way the rear wheel moves in relation to chain growth. But you can see in the videos there, as that rear wheel cycles through its travel, there's very little pullback on that chain set, and that's right across the gears as well. You know, it's something that Norco go into not only in the literature, but also chatting to Colin, their suspension designer, on the phone. He was like, yeah, we made a real effort to keep that pedal pullback and that anti-squat consistent right through the gearing range, because other bikes, what you'll find is as that chain angle changes, you'll get a real difference in the effective pullback through the pedals. But what's also interesting is that while I'd say this already has a low level of anti-squat, certainly in comparison with other bikes in this sort of 120mm travel cross-country arena, this bike, because it's got a 32 ring chain set, actually has more than the 120mm bikes, because there are bikes available with a 120mm fork and they come with a 34 tooth chainring, which naturally gives you a lower anti-squat value. And what that means on the trail is you have got a phenomenally smooth start stroke on this shock. I mean, it's, I wouldn't go, the old cliche is to say it's like a coil, but it's certainly, I don't think I'd go that far, but it's certainly very, very plush. And as soon as you're sitting into that sag, you're not just sitting on top of the seat stay spring, you're actually sort of 2mm into it in terms of the overall 4mm of flex down the length of that seat stay. So you're getting a very, very plushy ride for this kind of bike. The flip side of that is that because you haven't got any resistance to the initial movement of the shock, it's going to feel a lot more active, particularly out of the saddle. So if you're used to a hard feeling bike and that's what you like, you're not going to get on with the initial pedaling feel of this Norco, certainly on smooth, long tempo climbs. And you're probably going to want to watch for either the climb switch or maybe even the lockout to stabilize things at the back end. However, once you get onto broken jank and technical terrain where having a rear wheel that can respond and roll up and over and drop down into, you know, pockets in the terrain without any kind of interruption from your pedaling cadence, then that back end is absolutely phenomenal. So brilliant climbing grip, and also, as you'd expect, really, really good in terms of, you know, smoothness and control on the back end. Certainly, again, for a flex day bike, outstandingly smooth at the rear end, which is what enabled me to, you know, see some PRs on what I would consider proper big mountain terrain. And Norco have really leaned into that as well with the shock tune here. So they've gone for medium compression in the main compression circuit, and they've gone for medium on the climb switch as well, so relatively open. They haven't tried to choke things down with a higher compression there. And then the rebound is a specifically custom, very linear tune on there as well, which again makes the shock feel very open, makes it feel very active, which, you know, you might not want if you're an out the saddle sprint maniac. And, you know, it's worth noting the flagship bike in this range in the 120 comes with flight attendant, which I think it will suit brilliantly. Fantastic control. You know, RockShox sort of impact and pedal sensing lockout system, the full electronic remote system. I think it will work brilliantly on this bike because, you know, it's capable of being so open. But where it wins is just keeping a really, really plushy, smooth linkage style ride all the way down the hill, which is where I say, again, it would be nice, because while the back end is still working really, really well, that front foot can feel a little bit overwhelmed with that simpler damper. But, you know, it's a performance chassis, it's not a rhythm chassis, so it's just a case of dropping in a different damper if you wanted to upgrade it there. But there's also some very interesting things to talk about on the rest of the spec, so that's what we're doing with now. So obviously the highlight here is Dior XT Di2, the brand new wireless shifting system from Shimano. Now, to be honest, there's way too much to talk about here
in terms of all this new tech going on and how it actually feels on the bike to lump it into this video. So what I'm going to do is I'll do a separate video on it. But basically, the quick resume is it just feels like a wireless version of normal shifting. So it is very fast. It's very immediate in terms of its response to your shifter movement up at the top, and the fact that the shifters are fully adjustable in terms of paddle angle and paddle position. Well, not fully adjustable, but you've got a decent amount of adjustability. Is very, very impressive. However, the shift isn't nearly as curated as that slower shift that you get with SRAM Axis T-Type. So in the same way as with a cable group set, you can have incredibly fast shifts and incredibly clean shifts. You can also have some proper clunkers and grinders on occasion as well. And while you do get XT on the shifter and XT on the rear mech, I'll be honest, I looked at that chain set and I was like, oh, that's weird. The Dior XT chain set doesn't say Dior XT on it. It just says Dior. Well, that, my friends, is because it is actually a Dior chain set. It's from much lower down the Shimano product range. And, yep, that's also a Dior cassette. And, yep, that's a Dior chain. Those hubs, yep, they're Dior as well. And so are the rotors. And so are the brakes. I've got absolutely no complaints about the durability of Dior or indeed the functionality of it. However, you are paying a significant weight penalty by not having XT on there. So that chain set is over 200 grams heavier compared to Dior XT, and the cassette is 140 grams heavier. And also, speaking about the rest of the wheels, Stan's Arch D rims, 28mm internal diameter, which works okay with these 29 by 2.4 tyres. You've got Recon on the front. Again, top spec tyres, 3C Max Terra Exo protection. And then the absolutely fabulous, if slightly frustrating, in terms of how good it is, because it shouldn't be that good. That's a whole other video. Go find it if you wonder what the hell I'm on about. Forecaster 29 2.4 up front, with Stan's system inside, because they're Stan's rims. But it's a pinned and eyeletted rim. This is old school construction. And not only are those simple plain gauge spokes with no butting to make them lighter, but you get 32 in each wheel, when the kind of industry standard, even for trail bikes now, is 28 spokes per wheel. So even the spokes are adding a noticeable amount of weight to the wheel. And it's a pinned rim rather than a welded rim, which again, that's what you associate with, well, cheaper wheels. That's a cheaper way of making a rim than welding it. And those rims knock in at nearly 600 grams. So that's a heavy old wheel set once you get that Dior cassette on there, the heavier Dior rotors as well. So there's certainly a lot of weight you could pull out of that wheel set. So it's kind of a credit to the frame and backs up Norco's claims that with all this Dior, plus, you know, again, decent shaped, low riser bar. You've got a Norco own branded, I don't think is it even branded? Not sure it is, but yeah, 50mm stem on all models. And it's a simple but effective cold forged. And then you've got this Transex seat post on the back here, and then perfectly acceptable WTB saddle. So all decent kit, but none of it in any way lightweight. And which is why, like I say, I'm surprised that the overall bike weight for this large without pedals is only 13.3 kilos, which is pretty much exactly the same as the Specialized Epic Evo 8 in the equivalent build. The sticking point is that Specialized is around £1,000 cheaper than this Norco Revolver, at £4,500 compared to £5,500. So there we go. That's the Norco Revolver 130. And as I said at the start, it might not look that different, but the way this bike's been put together and the way the suspension's engineered makes it significantly different to most of the other bikes in this lightweight trail category. Because when I've been chatting to Jim Jamieson, their product manager for this project,
he said, you know, they deliberately came at it in a different way. It's not designed to be a World Cup race bike. They don't feel like that's the Norco customer that they're after. Or there's a huge amount of customers left. You know, there's already a lot of other brands operating in that space. What they wanted was to keep that trail capability of the original Revolver, but increase that with modern components, while at the same time making it lighter. So you've got the increasing capability, you've got a much lighter frame, but you've still got a bike that's much more geared to control, to survivability, and just that real plush traction for longer, adventurous stage races, that kind of racing, rather than your short, sprinting, flat-out hour with, you know, in a skin suit. This is your baggy shorts and peaked helmet kind of race bike. And I think what they've done in that respect, it really, really makes a lot of sense. I mean, you might find if you're used to a more positive pedaling platform, I'll definitely say you might want to spend more time with that suspension in the mid setting as your default setup. But then, you know, if you've got the bike that goes either side of that, then that's surely where you want the mid setup to be. You know, run it in the mid most of the time and then open it up for that full plush capability, whether that's for climbing traction on super janky trails or for just flat out descending, and then flick it to pedal firm where you've got a feeling that's a lot more like those kind of uptight Euro race bikes that dominate this category otherwise. But the whole joy of YouTube is the fact we've got a comment section below this, and I think this is going to create some really interesting feedback from you guys. You know, whether you ride a bike in this space, whether you're looking at getting a bike in this space because you're not ready for an e-bike yet, because that's basically where this bike is aimed at. People who still want to pedal, still want to hit aggressive trails hard, but don't feel they need a motor and a battery to do it yet. This is where I see this bike really, really coming on strong. Well, that's my personal opinion. So, if you'd like to tell me yours, let's have a chat about it below. But for now, thanks for your time watching. Hope this has been interesting for you. It's certainly been an interesting bike to work on. And don't forget to watch that live ride review to find out just how this goes on my favourite local trails.